Well, it's always helpful to take a closer look with the help of a map here of what is actually happening on the ground in Ukraine. With me now, again in the studio, is the military expert and veteran British Army tank commander Justin Crump, who is also chief executive of Sibylline as well. Justin, I was saying in the introduction to that report there by Stuart that Russia is running short of precision missiles. Perhaps you could just enlighten us as to actually what that means and particularly what the implications are.
Yeah, and this is actually part of the campaign Russia's been waging against the cities. So obviously, we're looking there at the Donbass, and we'll come back to that. But throughout all of the conflict, Russia's been launching longer-range strikes against cities, railway lines, infrastructure, grain infrastructure, food, of course, a big factor. And these particular missiles they've been using at the moment are technically anti-shipping missiles. They have an anti-land capability as well, but they're based in Crimea predominantly to stop enemy ships. Now, I guess Russia's figuring there aren't that many enemy ships to deal with. So they are using these missiles in their secondary role of land attack, but they're not brilliant at that. And it's a further indication of how Russia is having to use everything at its disposal to keep achieving its ends. I'd hesitate to say they're running really short of munitions as a result of this. They are suffering certain shortages, but I think it just shows how they're throwing everything into the fight. That's really where it's more important to me.
Interesting. Also, the focus of the world's media recently has sort of moved away from Mariupol. And sorry, I'm just going to invade your space somewhere. The focus has been there on Severodonetsk, hasn't it? Just explain why that's so important and what is going on there.
The reason that Severodonetsk is important, there's heavy street fighting still here. It's the last part of Luhansk Oblast. You can just see the boundary here, which Ukraine holds. So for Ukraine, it's really symbolic to be holding this last bit of territory in Luhansk Oblast. They haven't given up the Oblast. Russia can't say it's taken all of it. For Russia, though, the big fight here is their effort to destroy the Ukrainian armed forces. That's one of their war aims, is to demilitarize Ukraine. And they've always thought they could do it by taking the real best part of the Ukrainian military in the Donbass and trying to cut them off. It's been a war aim since day one. They started trying to encircle right in depth down there in this side of the map. They've had to come in smaller and smaller, and finally everything's focused on this end of the salient now. So hence, so important for both sides. And for Russia, it's all about trying to grind down the Ukrainian military at this point.
And so what would a fall of Severodonetsk actually look like?
Do you know, it's a hard city to defend because it's on the other side of the river from Lysychansk. So it's what we call the far bank for Ukrainian forces rather than the home bank. And as it sounds, home is safe, far is enemy dominated. So they have to get back across the river to Lysychansk. Good place to defend on high ground, but you can see that Russia's been trying to cut off that area for a while. They have this very threatening group of forces here. They failed to cross the river in the north before. We talked about that a few weeks ago. But if they do manage to threaten this area more, you have to fall back quite some way, and that's really difficult at this point in the conflict for Ukrainian forces. So the next line is Bakhmut, and then actually further to the west around here where the major cities are in Donetsk. But going back that way, that's when you're most exposed. If you have a little bit of time in this conflict, you dig trenches, you're sheltered, you can hold your ground, as Ukraine has done. When you get driven out of those, you're vulnerable. So it's a time of great danger for the Ukrainians, I think, especially when Lysychansk comes under really sustained pressure.
All right, certainly one that we need to be keeping our eye on, isn't it, Justin? Thank you very much indeed.